Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into some malicious compliance stories. Today we've got 3 tales of people who set boundaries, built fences, and stopped subsidizing the people who hurt them. One involves a sister who hid a friendship for years and learned that financial support isn't unconditional. Another, a dad who built barricades that hit back. And the last, an uncle who caught an HOA president on camera doing something unforgivable. Here we go. She hid it for years. She knew it would hurt me, but I'm the one who needs to move on because time has passed. My ex-husband and I were college sweethearts. We met in a statistics class during sophomore year, bonded over bad coffee and late-night study sessions, and never really untangled from there. By the time we graduated, everyone assumed we were a package deal. For me, life felt steady and certain. I trusted him the way you trust gravity, without question and without imagining it might fail. We built a life quickly. Marriage came in our late 20s, a modest house followed, and then our son. Those early years felt busy but happy. I never once doubted him. If anything, I thought we were the kind of couple other people quietly envied for how uncomplicated we seemed. That illusion cracked 6 years ago. He was 37 then, and the woman he fell for was 24. She worked with him, and from what I later learned, the affair wasn't even subtle. It was an open secret at his workplace. I won't get into how I found out, but I remember the physical sensation of it, like someone had removed the floor beneath my feet. When I confronted him, he didn't yell or deny it. He just said, "I'm sorry. I tried really hard not to fall for her." He delivered it calmly, almost thoughtfully, like he was explaining a scheduling conflict. There was no desperation in his voice, no panic at losing his family. If anything, it felt like he was relieved I'd discovered it so he didn't have to keep pretending. Part of me wanted him to fight. I wanted anger, regret, begging, something that showed I mattered. Instead, he signed the divorce papers without hesitation. He didn't contest custody. He didn't argue over assets. It was as though he had already emotionally relocated months before I knew it. Watching someone you've loved for over a decade detach that easily is its own kind of trauma. Our son was 4 at the time. I don't know how I functioned during that first year. I showed up to work, I packed lunches, I answered preschool emails. But inside, I was unraveling. I went to therapy because I had to, because I could feel myself becoming someone I didn't recognize. It took years to stop checking her social media, years to stop comparing my body and face and personality to hers. She's beautiful. That's the part people don't say gently. She's charming, too, effortlessly social in ways I never was. His family adored her almost immediately. One of our mutual friends actually said, "I don't support cheating, but I mean, look at her." When I confided in her, I stared at her in disbelief. I realized then that some people measure betrayal on a sliding scale of attractiveness. I cut off that entire friend group shortly after. I didn't need spectators evaluating my replacement like a casting choice. He married her 3 years ago. They now have a daughter. From the outside, they look like a picture-perfect little family. Weekend soccer games, coordinated holiday photos, the whole curated narrative. Our custody arrangement is straightforward. Our son stays with him on weekends and alternating holidays. For the most part, it works. I've kept things civil for our child's sake because he deserves stability even if his father and I couldn't maintain it. Last week, everything shifted again. My younger sister, Claire, left her phone at my house after dinner. I wasn't snooping. It lit up repeatedly on the kitchen counter while she was gone. I glanced at the screen to see if it was urgent and froze when I saw the sender's name. It was my ex-husband's wife. There wasn't just one message, there were threads, photos, casual back-and-forth conversations stretching back months, maybe years. When Claire came back for her phone, I asked her directly, "How long have you been talking to her?" She didn't even flinch. "Oh, that? It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal," I asked. "You're best friends with my ex-husband's wife and never thought to mention it?" She shrugged. "They were part of my life, too. You don't get to dictate who I'm friends with." That stung more than I expected. She's 28, nearly 15 years younger than me. When I was married, she looked up to him like a brother. I could have understood occasional contact for the sake of our son, but best friends, shared vacations, inside jokes, all hidden from me for 6 years? I'm not dictating anything, I said carefully. You can do whatever you want, but I'm done helping you. For context, I've been contributing to her college loan payments for the past 2 years. It wasn't an obligation. It was something I did because I could and because I believed in family supporting family. She went pale when I said that. You can't just cut me off over this, she said. You're being petty. It's been 6 years. You need to move on. You need to move on, as if healing runs on a schedule, as if 6 years is some magic number where pain expires. She didn't just hide the friendship. She's now telling you how to feel about it. That's not a sister. That's a judge. I have moved on, I replied, but that doesn't mean I have to finance someone who thinks this is acceptable. She snapped that I was overreacting and that my ex's wife is a lovely person. I told her I didn't care if she rescues puppies and bakes cookies for the elderly. That doesn't change what she represents in my life. Claire accused me of still being bitter. I told her bitterness has nothing to do with boundaries. The part that truly blindsided me was my parents' reaction. They think I'm being dramatic. They say Claire is young and shouldn't have to choose sides. They've suggested I'm holding on to something that happened a long time ago. I find it fascinating how time softens betrayal for everyone except the person who lived through it. What hurts isn't that Claire's friendly with them, it's that she hid it. She knew it would hurt me, she chose secrecy over honesty, and then she minimized it when confronted. That's not neutrality, that's alignment. I've gone no contact with her. I told her clearly, you're free to build whatever relationships you want, but I'm free to decide where my money and energy go. She accused me of trying to punish her. I told her I'm simply choosing myself for once. Maybe to outsiders it looks like stubbornness. Maybe it looks like I'm stuck in the past. But healing doesn't require me to accept every connection that crosses my path. Forgiveness doesn't obligate proximity. And financial support certainly isn't unconditional when loyalty is optional. I survived my marriage ending. I survived being compared to someone younger and shinier. I rebuilt my life from scratch. I'm not going to destabilize it again to make other people comfortable. If that makes me unreasonable in their eyes, so be it. I've spent enough years swallowing my feelings for the sake of keeping the peace. I'm done funding people who treat my pain like an expiration-dated inconvenience. Your sister has the right to be friends with whom she chooses to, and you have the right to do with your money as you wish. Take the money you've been contributing to her and put it in your son's college fund. Let your ex, his wife, and your parents pay for her school loans. And our second story. Neighborhood speeders keep destroying our homemade traffic barricades. My dad rebuilt them with hidden 4x4 posts inside. When I was growing up, my family lived on a private dead-end road that felt like its own small universe. It sat just far enough off the main street to avoid traffic, but close enough that friends could bike over without a car ride. Almost every house had at least one kid, and in the evenings, the road turned into our playground. We rode bikes down the center line, played tag between driveways, and set up impromptu basketball games that only ended when someone's porch light flicked on as the universal signal to head home. It was safe in the comfortable, predictable way only small neighborhoods can be. The only real problem came from people who didn't live there. Every so often, a teenager or young adult would tear down our road like it was a shortcut on a racetrack, using the dead end to spin around in a dramatic squeal of tires before blasting back out. It wasn't constant, but it happened often enough to make parents nervous. You could hear engines revving before headlights swung into view, and more than once, a parent had to shout for a child to get out of the street. With that many kids outside, it only took one mistake to turn fun into tragedy. Eventually, the homeowners decided enough was enough. Since it was a private road, they had the authority to install barriers to discourage speeding. The plan was simple. Place 2 staggered barricades near the entrance, forcing drivers to slow down and weave through carefully. Residents could pass without trouble, but anyone flying in at high speed would have to rethink their approach. It wasn't about blocking access, it was about forcing accountability. My dad immediately volunteered to build them. He's always been the frugal, hands-on type who believes most store-bought solutions are overpriced and underbuilt. During the meeting, he said, "Why pay for something flimsy when we can build it better ourselves?" He offered to construct the barricades and just be reimbursed for materials. The neighbors were thrilled, and within days he had sketches spread across the garage workbench like he was designing a small-scale engineering project. The first set looked surprisingly professional. He built frames out of hollow plastic beams and attached a bright white plastic picket facade so they were highly visible. Weighted bases kept them steady during windstorms, which were common in our area. Once installed, they worked exactly as intended. Cars entering the road slowed to a crawl and carefully weaved through. The speeding problem disappeared almost overnight. For a few peaceful weeks, it seemed like the issue was solved. Then one morning we woke up to find the barricades obliterated. The beams were cracked, the picket fronts shattered, and one base had been shoved halfway into the grass. It didn't look like an accident, it looked deliberate, like someone had lined up and gunned it. No one had seen or heard anything, but everyone suspected it was one of the same reckless drivers who used to treat our street like a drag strip. The neighbors asked my dad if he would rebuild them. He agreed without hesitation, though I could tell something had shifted. When the second set was destroyed a few weeks later in almost the exact same way, it stopped feeling random. My dad stood in the driveway looking at the wreckage and said quietly, "All right, if that's how they want to play it." The third set looked identical from the outside. Same hollow plastic beams, same white picket facade, same weighted bases. What no one could see was that he had reinforced the interior with solid 4x4 wooden posts sitting inside the plastic shell. From a distance, they appeared just as breakable as before. Up close, they were basically disguised battering rams. A few days after installing them, we found one tipped slightly to the side, a handful of plastic pickets had snapped off, and faint tire marks cut through the grass. But the structure itself hadn't shattered. It hadn't split. It had absorbed the impact and held firm. My dad crouched down, examined the scuff marks, and gave a small nod of satisfaction. "I'd bet their bumper isn't looking too good," he said. We never found out who tried to run them down. There were no cameras and no witnesses. But after that night, the speeding stopped completely. No more engines roaring down our road, no more reckless turnarounds at the dead end. The reinforced barricade stood for years without another attempt at destruction. We didn't need to know exactly who learned the lesson. The silence that followed was proof enough. And our last story. My uncle isn't in the HOA. They fined him anyway. My uncle bought his piece of land long before the neighborhood around him filled in. When he purchased it, it was mostly open space with a few scattered homes in the distance, and he liked it that way. He built his house slowly over several years, doing a lot of the work himself and keeping things simple. He valued privacy, space, and most of all, not being told what to do with property he paid for outright. So when new houses started popping up around him and the residents formed a homeowners association, he made it very clear he would not be joining. For a while, that decision didn't cause any problems. The HOA mostly focused on matching mailboxes and lawn heights among its own members. My uncle kept his yard neat, his driveway clean, and his 7 dogs well cared for. 2 were bloodhounds, 1 was a pit bull, and the rest were mixed breeds he'd rescued over the years. They were friendly but protective, and he was always careful about making sure they stayed on his property. The real issue started when he noticed several neighborhood kids playing in his backyard. They were running around near the tree line, treating it like a public park. My uncle was alarmed because even the gentlest dog can react unpredictably if startled, especially by screaming children. The last thing he wanted was a kid getting bitten and his dogs being blamed, so he decided to build a fence around the perimeter of his land, both to protect the kids and to protect his dogs. It took him 3 full days to finish the fence. It was sturdy, practical, and entirely on his property line. The very next morning, he found a notice taped to his front door from the HOA stating that he had built a fence without approval and was being fined. He laughed when he read it, crumpled the paper, and tossed it into the trash. He wasn't a member of their association, and the fence did not violate any city codes. As far as he was concerned, that was the end of it. A week later, a man from the HOA showed up at his door to discuss the violation. My uncle calmly explained that he was not part of the HOA and had no intention of paying a fine to an organization he never joined. He also explained that he built the fence because children had been trespassing and he had 7 dogs to worry about, not just a single dog the HOA apparently thought he owned. The man seemed surprised at the number of dogs, but eventually said something about coming to an understanding if the fence was painted. My uncle had already planned to paint it, he simply hadn't gotten around to it yet. The next day, however, multiple fines arrived in his mailbox. There was one for the unapproved fence, one citing aggressive animal concerns, and another vaguely referencing aesthetic noncompliance. He ignored those two. From his perspective, none of it was legally binding because he was not a member. He figured they would eventually get bored and move on to bothering someone else. A few days later, he bought 2 large cans of white paint and started painting the fence. As he worked, neighbors walked by. Some offered polite greetings, while others glared as if he were personally lowering their property values by applying fresh paint. He continued painting without reacting. After about an hour, a small group of HOA representatives approached him. One woman, who introduced herself stiffly as a board member, said, "You cannot paint that fence without approval." My uncle blinked at her and replied, "It's white. What exactly is the problem?" She explained that the fence itself was not approved and therefore painting it was irrelevant. Another board member chimed in and said he would need to tear it down by the end of the week and formally request permission to rebuild it. He set his paintbrush down and said calmly, "I'm not in your HOA. I don't answer to you." The conversation escalated quickly. They brought up his dogs again, implying that certain breeds were unsafe for the community. One of them suggested that if the fence was removed, they would revisit the issue of his dogs entirely. By then, a small crowd of curious neighbors had gathered. My uncle recognized that the situation was heading somewhere unproductive, so he picked up his paint supplies and walked back inside without another word. 3 days later, while checking the inside perimeter of the fence, he noticed several pieces of bacon scattered along the grass. At first, he thought someone had dropped food accidentally, but when he picked one up, he saw it was coated in a fine white powder. It had a strong chemical smell that immediately made him uneasy. He realized someone was attempting to poison his dogs. That was the moment he stopped ignoring things. He installed cameras along the entire fence line, making sure they covered every angle. Within a week, the cameras captured someone tossing bacon over the fence late at night. When he reviewed the footage, he was stunned to recognize the face. It was the HOA president, a woman he had not yet met personally, but had heard about through the various complaints. For the sake of simplicity, let's call her Karen. The following month, he attended the HOA meeting despite not being a member. He waited patiently until the open discussion portion, then stood up and said, "I have something you all need to see." He played the footage on a portable screen and placed a sealed bag containing the poisoned bacon on the table. The room fell silent as Karen's face appeared clearly on video, tossing the tainted meat over the fence. She tried to interrupt him, but he continued calmly, "If this happens again, I will contact the police," he said. "Attempting to poison animals is a crime." He didn't shout or threaten, he simply stated facts. The mood in the room shifted quickly, board members looked horrified, and several neighbors began whispering angrily. After that meeting, the bacon stopped appearing. Within weeks, Karen was voted out as HOA president. Not long after, she moved away. About a month later, one of the neighbors quietly told my uncle that the children he'd seen playing in his yard had been Karen's kids. Apparently, they'd been complaining nonstop since the fence went up because they could no longer use his backyard as their personal playground. That's the part that ties it together. She wasn't fighting for property values or community standards. She was fighting because her kids lost their private playground. The fence he built to protect them became the thing she tried to destroy him over. The irony was not lost on him. He had built the fence to protect those same children from his dogs. Instead, their mother had responded by trying to harm the dogs. The HOA never bothered him again, and no further fines arrived. He never called the police, largely because he had a complicated history with them from when he was younger and didn't trust the system to treat him fairly. But the cameras remained, and the fence stayed firmly in place. In the end, he didn't need to tear anything down. The only thing that came down was the HOA president's position. Let's talk about who really won. Story one was the cost of secrecy. The sister hid a friendship for years, then told the OP to move on like pain expires on a calendar. But moving on doesn't mean subsidizing people who choose alignment over honesty. Story 2 was physics as justice. The speeders destroyed the first 2 barricades. The third one they couldn't see, solid 4x4 posts hidden inside hollow plastic. They hit it once, hard, and never tried again. No confrontation, no names, just a bumper that learned a lesson. Sometimes the best revenge is invisible. But story 3 wins. She lost her position, she moved away, the kids lost their playground anyway, all because she couldn't accept a fence built to protect them. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.